a law that will outlaw many of your worries. As a child, I grew up on a Missouri farm, and one day, while helping my mother pick cherries, I began to cry. My mother said, "Dale, what in the world are you crying about?" I blubbered, "I'm afraid I am going to be buried alive." I was full of worries in those days. When thunderstorms came, I worried for fear I would be killed by lightning. When hard times came, I worried for fear we wouldn't have enough to eat. I worried for fear I would go to hell when I died. I was terrified for fear an older boy, Sam White, would cut off my big ears as he threatened to do. I worried for fear girls would laugh at me if I tipped my hat to them. I worried for fear no girl would ever be willing to marry me. I worried about what I would say to my wife immediately after we were married. I imagined that we would be married in some country church, and then get in a surrey with fringe on the top and ride back to the farm, but how would I be able to keep the conversation going on that ride back to the farm? How? I pondered over that earth-shaking problem for many an hour as I walked behind the plow.
As the years went by, I gradually discovered that 99% of the things I worried about never happened. For example, as I have already said, I was once terrified of lightning, but I now know that the chances of my being killed by lightning in any 1 year are, according to the National Safety Council, only 1 in 350,000. My fear of being buried alive was even more absurd. I don't imagine that 1 person in 10 million is buried alive, yet I once cried for fear of it. 1 person out of every 8 dies of cancer. If I had wanted something to worry about, I should have worried about cancer instead of being killed by lightning or being buried alive. To be sure, I have been talking about the worries of youth and adolescence. But many of our adult worries are almost as absurd. You and I could probably eliminate 9/10 of our worries right now if we would cease our fretting long enough to discover whether, by the law of averages, there was any real justification for our worries.
The most famous insurance company on earth, Lloyd's of London, has made countless millions out of the tendency of everybody to worry about things that rarely happen. Lloyd's of London bets people that the disasters they are worrying about will never occur. However, they don't call it betting. They call it insurance. But it is really betting based on the law of averages. This great insurance firm has been going strong for 200 years, and unless human nature changes, it will still be going strong 50 centuries from now by insuring shoes and ships and sealing wax against disasters that, by the law of average, don't happen nearly so often as people imagine.
If we examine the law of averages, we will often be astounded at the facts we uncover. For example, if I knew that during the next 5 years I would have to fight in a battle as bloody as the Battle of Gettysburg, I would be terrified. I would take out all the life insurance I could get. I would draw up my will and set all my earthly affairs in order. I would say, I'll probably never live through that battle, so I had better make the most of the few years I have left. Yet the facts are that, according to the law of averages, it is just as dangerous, just as fatal, to try to live from age 50 to age 55 in peacetime as it was to fight in the Battle of Gettysburg. What I am trying to say is this: in times of peace, just as many people die per thousand between the ages of 50 and 55 as were killed per thousand among the 163,000 soldiers who fought at Gettysburg.
I wrote several chapters of this book at James Simpson's Num-Ti-Gah Lodge, on the shore of Bow Lake in the Canadian Rockies. While stopping there one summer, I met Mr. and Mrs. Herbert H. Salinger, of 2298 Pacific Avenue, San Francisco. Mrs. Salinger, a poised, serene woman, gave me the impression that she had never worried. One evening in front of the roaring fireplace, I asked her if she had ever been troubled by worry. Troubled by it? She said. My life was almost ruined by it. Before I learned to conquer worry, I lived through 11 years of self-made hell. I was irritable and hot-tempered. I lived under terrific tension. I would take the bus every week from my home in San Mateo to shop in San Francisco. But even while shopping, I worried myself into a dither. Maybe I had left the electric iron connected on the ironing board. Maybe the house had caught fire. Maybe the maid had run off and left the children. Maybe they had been out on their bicycles and been killed by a car. In the midst of my shopping, would often worry myself into a cold perspiration and rush out and take the bus home to see if everything was all right. No wonder my first marriage ended in disaster.
My second husband is a lawyer, a quiet, analytical man who never worries about anything. When I became tense and anxious, he would say to me, "Relax. Let's think this out. What are you really worrying about? Let's examine the law of averages and see whether or not it is likely to happen." For example, I remember the time we were driving from Albuquerque, New Mexico, to the Carlsbad Caverns, driving on a dirt road when we were caught in a terrible rainstorm.
The car was slithering and sliding. We couldn't control it. I was positive we would slide off into one of the ditches that flanked the road, but my husband kept repeating to me, "I am driving very slowly. Nothing serious is likely to happen. Even if the car does slide into the ditch, by the law of averages, we won't be hurt." His calmness and confidence quieted me. One summer we were on a camping trip in the Tuquin Valley of the Canadian Rockies. One night we were camping 7,000 feet above sea level, when a storm threatened to tear our tents to shreds. The tents were tied with guy ropes to a wooden platform. The outer tent shook and trembled and screamed and shrieked in the wind. I expected every minute to see our tent torn loose and hurled through the sky. I was terrified. But my husband kept saying, "Look, my dear, we are traveling with Brewster's guides. Brewsters know what they are doing. They have been pitching tents in these mountains for 60 years. This tent has been here for many seasons. It hasn't blown down yet and, by the law of averages, it won't blow away tonight, and even if it